Good evening, all. I hope you all can see my screen and hope you all can hear me well. So I'd like to have your response through the chat so that I can see that I am not disconnected and I'm connected and I'm communicating the present. Right. Hope you all can hear me well. Just one more confirmation, guys.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, let me start. Today we are talking about understanding the cybersecurity landscape, as Pumi mentioned earlier. So when we discussing about the cybersecurity, this is a very broad area, right? So I would like to get this topic and tell you what is the landscape around cybersecurity and what are the prerequisites that we need to know and how we are applying this to our project day-to-day life and day-to-day work, right? Uh, so my objectives are, first I would like to mainly we have three phases. So in first phase I would like to describe about the landscape of the cybersecurity, so the different terms and also the well-known CI triad and other elements, and the security triangle and how we should apply that to our projects and to understand the cost of security, right? And some prerequisites where for the people, the associates who are new to security, the cyber security, right? What are the areas that you should learn and you should harden your skill set with regard to the subject. So next, I am going to talk about how we are going to apply this securing SDLC, right? So what are the roles of each of our discipline as a QA, BA, Dev, and DevOps, right? So I'm talking about the application, right? So next, in the third phase, I'd like to mention a couple of engagements what we have did and the process what we are currently follow and our activities. So those are the lineup for today. So I think this will be very informative session for you, and I think this will be mostly you will gain your role with regard to the cybersecurity in your project. Uh, when we are moving to the landscape of cybersecurity, it's important to understand what are these terms, right? So information security and cybersecurity, right? So lots of people, even the people who we are say as well-known security professionals, right? They also having doubt about information security and cybersecurity, right? So information security is about data. So when data is converted to something meaningful, we say information security. When we are protecting it, we say information security. But in cyber security, it's more broader area. It's go beyond information security. And as you can see in this picture, in the left side circle, we are talking about information security, and we have this analog and digital information. And with regard to cyber security, information is only a part of it. And we have this ICT, what we say as ICT is information, communication, and technology. So all things related to information, communication, and technology are into cybersecurity, right? So you can understand the gravity of cybersecurity term, right? So when you talk about information security, it's a different thing, and when you talk about cybersecurity, it's another thing, right? Uh, so I would like to remind these basic elements. I think most of you may know by now what are these, but the important thing is that how you should apply it in your project, right? So confidentiality, integrity, availability are the three pillars of IS. We are talking about information security here, right? So confidentiality we are achieving through encryption, where uh, others cannot listen and others cannot uh, I mean modify, right? They cannot access. And in the integrity we are talking about hashing, where they cannot do tamper, right? They cannot tamper the data. And availability is straightforward, where we are preventing those attacks, so that people who authorize to access, they can access, right? And authentication, authorization, and non-repudiation is another three elements which are going with CIA trial. And with authentication and authorization, those are kind of a basic security factors, as we all know. And with non-repudiation, we are achieving this through digital signatures, where the people cannot deny later that they have not received or sent the information. So those are the basic elements of information security, where you need to uh, you need to remember these especially these 6 elements, and see how you are interacting when implementing or when testing or when requirement gathering, anyway, how you are interacting with these elements. So in that way you can strengthen the overall information security aspect. So this security triangle, this is very important, very simple logic here, right? So we have functionality, usability, and security. Uh, so this ball is your project, right? So when you move in the ball towards security, means actually it is less functionality and usability. So for an example, if we say aviation application, where it's more of a functionality based application, and we have less UI, right? When it's the functionality is increased, the security is or risk of securing it is increasing, right? So for each project place in this within this triangle, we can place it within this triangle and see how our security is in each of those projects, right? So understanding the security posture, the triangle is very important, and it's worth that you remember it. uh, so I'm moving to some prerequisites. So I'm talking about OSI layer and associated threats of that. So why I'm talking about OSI layer? So these we are having 7 layers. So each layer we have security threats, and if we cover all 7 layers, only we can say that our security is acceptable and enough to some extent, right? Uh, so when we talk about application layer, that is the layer where users are interacting in the browser, and that's where the most vulnerable threats are exist, right? So for an example, unvalidated inputs. So that is a very common vulnerability in so many applications that we need to handle. And when it comes to presentation layer, the 6th layer, we are dealing about the encryption and all, right? So in that way, loss of private key and asymmetric encryption, for an example, I'll come to those encryption basics later. That's a threat in presentation layer. So you need to understand each layer and realize what are the possible threats in each, right? When it comes to session layer, it's we have the session hijacking threat, and also when it comes to transport and network, where we dealing the most valuable 2 layers, the TCP/IP. So we have this TCP. We can do TCP flag scans, right? So in the TCP we have 6 flags, so you can later investigate it if you need to know. And when it comes to network layer, we are talking about IPs, right? So IP address spoofing is another threat, where it's very basic threat. Uh, so when it comes to data link, so sniffing is a threat, right? So we can sniff the switches and hubs. And when it comes to physical layer, in the first layer, uh, even an accidental or malicious intent or maybe power outage, those are threats, right? So you need to understand the security threats of each of these OSI layers very well, in order to measure, in order to test, implement the security aspects of your project. And covering each of these layers very important. So in some situations you may interact with only one layer, for an example application layer only, like that may depend on your role. Even depend on your role, you might not interact with all, but you need to see where I placed, right? So that's the taking point here. Then the TCP/IP communication and associated threats. So here I'm talking about the 3-way handshake, where mostly when we are talking about TCP, we have TCP and UDP, the 2 protocols, right? TCP is the protocol where we communicated mostly and with the established way. UDP is something that is not established, but for an example, it's very fast. For video streaming and video calling, we use UDP. But TCP is where we establish the client server negotiation and we communicate. So here how this relates to the securities. Now we do this SYN and ACK acknowledgement. We call it three-way handshake. Synchronization and acknowledgement from the server side, and then again acknowledgement from the client side. So in that way, the two machines acknowledge and establish the connection and start to communicate. So in here, there are two things that I identified. One is that we can deny the availability by performing those attacks. How we deny? We can send SYN, and then we are expecting SYNAC anyway. Then we are not acknowledging it from as a client, so that server side they have a timeout, so they wait till acknowledgement comes from client, but it's not actually receiving, right? So in that case, client is continuously sending thousands of SYN requests again and again, and memory goes up and availability is breached. So that's how TCP SYN flood DOS attack work, right? We call it a SYN flood. And when it comes to TCP SYN scan, we can use this to discover open ports for some extent. So how we discover open ports, we have these popular tools for that. We again send in the SYN request, and based on the response from the server, we can identify whether server is up or not, right? Servers open ports are up or not. So that's the idea behind that. So it's really important if you are dealing with, for an example, network scanning, this TCP/IP communication and associated flags that you need to know. So this very important thing across the network scanning. And here I'm talking about wired and wireless. So why I brought this slide? So wired and wireless is two different setups, right? You need to understand how your solution or your project, how your solution placed in the production or in your test environment, because based on the wired or wireless, your security is getting different. So for an example, wireless attacks are very, compared to wired, we can hack wireless attack very easily because they are radio waves and they can intercept it. Even an attacker can maybe some person who close to your home, maybe is in your garden, maybe is in your upper floor, right? They can access your wireless access point maybe and router. So in that way, it's very when compared to wired network, the threat is high. So that they can establish rogue wireless access points, and people who don't know about the access points, maybe they are vulnerable to those. So also the encryption. So when compared to wired, we have these. Actually, nowadays we have some stronger encryptions in wireless, but when compared to wired, it's not that strong when compared to wired. So when talking about wired networks, we cannot deny that the threats are not there. For an example, an insider who having physical access easily can easily can be a threat, a malicious insider, right? And also some unattended physical devices which are available in maybe in your office lobby or some common places, public places, they are vulnerable, right? Even though it's wired network. So you need to identify the network and see the possibilities of threats there. So that is very important. Now I am moving to this cryptography. So what is cryptography? It's actually we do this to establish a private communication, right? So encryption is something that people cannot read, right? So in the middle they cannot read, right? From one end to another only we can decrypt and see the message. So that is a very common technique that most of the in digital era we do, and to protect the personal identifiable information or to protect any important information, we do encryption. So cryptography is we mentioned that as an encryption and hashing. So in encryption, we do have this. We have these two basics methods. One, we have we have only a single key. We call it private key, and the party who encrypt and the party who decrypt both share the same key, right? So for this to happen, we have to share the key in some form to the receiver so that they can decrypt. So when we talk about the public key cryptography, we call it asymmetry. That's where we use two keys, one key for decrypt and another key for encrypt. So when we using public key as a encryption and private key as a decryption, we are talking about confidentiality because others cannot decrypt. Only the person who intended that they can decrypt. And when we talking about private key as encryption and public key as a decryption, that's another. We are talking about authentication. So that's how we are ensuring the information security CIA triad, right? uh, Hashing is something different. So hashing is that we use actually plain text converted into a fixed length. So whatever that is based on the algorithm only, right? So based on the algorithm, uh, any plain text, different length of plain text, we are converted into a fixed length. So hashing and encryption is two different things. So here the same key encryption, it works with the same key, and with the public and private we use two different keys. So each any project where encryption required, they are following either this or that, right? And when talking about algorithms, we have this. When talking about encryption algorithms, we have this DES, AES, and RSA. These are different algorithms based on the key sizes and block sizes. And also, when talking about hashing, MD5 and SHA is two popular hashing algorithms. So these are different algorithms. So how you ensure by knowing these? As a developer, you get to know now what are the encryption algorithms that I am using and how far these are securing. And as a tester, you can get to know by investigating the algorithms. You can question that are these strength here, or don't we need to change these, right? From your architect or from your dev people, you can request this. Like the same way the hashing has. So you need to know these encryption basics for a minimum level in order to understand the security as a prerequisite, right? Uh, so I'm talking about threat modeling. So another important methodology where how you ensure security. So threat modeling at Zone 24/7, we do have these 5 phases where we first gather the knowledge, and then we are identifying these intentions and motives of an attacker, and identifying these different methods of achieving those. And then during the architecture reviews of each project, we are doing this architecture deep dive for security vulnerabilities with a discussion. And then we are identifying attack vectors. We use this stride methodology for that. So I'll come to that. And as a last phase, we are trying to finalize the threat model. So identify threats which does not have mitigation strategies. So then we have to revisit the design and architecture. So stride methodology is kind of a uh, very structured one, because actually we are covering most of the security elements. Actually, we can say all security elements, including CI threat. We covered everything. So as a risk, we are identifying each impacted security aspect so that we are covering the whole scope of threats. So that's why we do stride methodology. There are different methodologies to do threat modeling, but stride methodology is something is very popular and commonly used, right? Uh, so now I'm talking about web application threats. So here, these are common web application threats I'm talking about. So actually, we can discuss more longer for each threat, but I'm trying to summarize this here. Injection flows are very common as SQL injection. So validating input is the priority here. So authentication is, we have to have multi-factor authentication for that. And sensitive data exposure, where you exposing sensitive data in different places in your project. And XML external entities, we are dealing with XML files. And broken access control, we are not correctly controlling the access. So that's where the broken access control comes. Security misconfiguration, most of the times it's part of configurations in the project. It can be from software to hardware to deployment. Cross-site scripting, again, web application thread, very popular one, where you can send scripts, right? For an example, JavaScript, to again to retrieve cookies, to retrieve database values, and very danger threat here, right? So insecure deserialization, we are talking about serializing and deserializing, so that when stored from let's say from file to stream, when we are retrieving data, if the sensitive data can be exposed, so that is again another important threat. uh, this ninth one, the use of components with known vulnerabilities, again very common one, because we are using most of the time these third party components and libraries. So you need to you need to aware that what are the third party components, libraries we use, what are the versions, and what are the possible threats in each, right? So in that way we can secure our project, secure our software. So when it comes to the last one, the login and monitoring, again, you need to be aware when, especially when developing, what are the things that you are going to log. So do we need to log sensitive information? You need to, because in sometimes the developers forget to uh, remove these information later. So that's why it's very it's placed as a 10th most important threat in web application. So these are like, if you cover at least these web application threats, like the basic ones, we can say it's like very fairly secure, right? So that's why I need to brought it here. And because we are dealing with web applications at most of the times, it's better to know and get aware about these threats and realize how you should ensure these are not exposed in your project. Now I'm coming to this ethical hacking term, right? So ethical hacking, here I brought out different terminologies. So hack value and vulnerability. What is the vulnerability? The weakness, right, in design or implementation error. Exploit is a breach of vulnerability. So payload is something that we can use as a some part to exploit the code. So zero-day attack, this is something that we have zero-day vulnerabilities. That means a uh, patch is not deployed, right? So actually, the people who responsible for the code for that particular vulnerability, they have not implemented a solution yet. So that is very vulnerable. So zero-day attacks are very common. I mean, very vulnerable. The risk is high. So until the patch is implemented. So bot is actually, we are using we call it bot, where multiple systems act as a act together to a target system as a to perform a DOS attack. So that that systems we call them bot. So that's the reason for that. So these are different terminologies in terms of security, what we say. So you need to understand different terminologies. That's something worth doing. So now, what is the scope and limitation? So scope of ethical hacking is something, this is a crucial component of risk assessment, auditing and all, right? And also this identifying risk and highlight the remedial action is a priority of ethical hacking. We do it ethically, right? So when it come to unethical, we call them actually the hackers, right? In ethical hacking, we do it in a defense way. The purpose is to defend, not to offense, right? So also reduces the ICT cost by resolving the vulnerabilities. So, but the limitation is, even though we identified vulnerabilities, it's up to organization to place the right guards on the network. So that's the limitation that we have to communicate clearly. So even though we identified, it's up to the organization or the project team to place those right guards, right? So then we are talking about this penetration testing. So what is penetration testing? We are simulating the cyber attack, right, with an authorization, and also to identify both weaknesses as well as strengths. So we have this black box, white box, gray box penetration testing as the concept is same. So black box, we don't have the inner knowing of the code. White box is we are depending on the input and output. Gray box is we have partially knowing the code, right? So in the phases, we can divide this to pre-attack, attack, and post-attack. Now this associated loss, this is very important. So whenever you are doing a testing or implementing any project, you need to know aware what are that specific laws or standards your client follows. So with that, we have to by default we have to comply. So when we are complying it, we need to know different certain set of standards to follow in your project in terms of implementation or in terms of testing, right, in terms of requirement. So understanding different laws are very important in your project. So you need to aware my client following these, complying with these laws or standards. So that is very important. Okay, so now we have identified and we have went through some different aspects of cybersecurity in terms of networking to web application, in terms of testing techniques, right? So those are set of prerequisites that you need to know. So I think you got some good information from that, and further you can investigate by yourself and harden your skill set. Now I'm trying to talking about the securing your software development life cycle and what is your role. So before moving that, I would like to watch this video. This is actually a 5-minute video. So I'm trying to copy this link in the chat, so you can read and post in chat so that I can continue. So now it's 5:32. So please start watching this, and after 5 minutes we can continue. Okay, so please let me know once you have done so that we can continue. Okay, cool. Looks like all went through the video. So I think you understood the importance of securing the SDLC, right? So let me go back to the slide. Okay, so as video suggests, right, it's really important to handle securing the SDLC. So here we are talking about from requirement gathering to deployment, right? Uh, so in each phase, it's really important that you address the correct measures to securing your solution. When we're starting with before development begins, so I have defined these 5 phases where before development begins, we need to define the SDLC, whether it's a waterfall or agile, right? Then we need to review the policies and standards, maybe the tech-wise standards what we are following. And during the definition and design, we need to understand the security requirements and the design and architecture, right? And also the threat models. So in that way, we can ensure our security throughout the design phase is intact, right? And in the development phase, the code walkthroughs and reviews are very important. And when it comes to deployment, the application side penetration testing and also the configuration management testing, where we test the network and the server side deployment. So that is very important. And maintenance and operation after we are in production, maybe, right? So after in production, we need to manage the changes. So we need to conduct periodic health checks and also to ensure the change verification. Those are different tasks that in each SDLC that we have to do. So if we are like the most important thing here is, if you someone like someone thinking that in this testing phase only we can ensure the security, that is not correct. So I'll tell you why. So now here the proportion of test efforts in SDLC. Now you can see this is through some research I found out. During the define and design, we have half of the circle is covered, right? So when it comes to develop, more than 75%, 80%, up to 80% we have covered, right? So in that phases, if we skip those and we are trying to define in the security through testing in the deployment or maintain, that is not 100% correct. So if this is a new development project, so this is the best way is from the define itself, from the defining phase itself, to start harden the security aspect. So that is really important. So when it comes to proportion of test effort according to test technique, right? Process reviews and manual inspections are the most important, right? So in that way, and also the code review. Now you can see the security testing is what's the portion of that, right? So through process reviews, manual inspection, and code reviews, we can cover majority, right? So that is really important. Uh, so now I'm going to cover your role, right? I'm bringing out some important facts for you, for each of you, BA, QA, Dev, and DevOps. How you play your role in your project, right? As a BA, the information security prerequisites, the basics, you need to know, that is a must throughout every role, that is a must. And then the priority here is understanding the security requirement of your client, right? So understand the handling of PII, the personally identifiable information data, or don't we have that in your project? So that is you need to know upfront, right? Based on that, the level of security is different. So that you need to know, and also understanding your client have any standards or security policies to follow. So that is again very important fact. And when you are writing requirements, always consider basic security aspects. So don't deny those. Basic security aspects always should be there. And ultimately, you should discuss your security requirements like your functional requirements throughout your project, internal stakeholders. So in that way, your requirements communicate clearly to other fellow other colleagues, right? So as a business analyst, that I think by doing this, you are playing you are responsible, and you are playing your role from the secure SDLC side, right? So as a quality assurance engineer, so as a QA, it's very important. So your role is actually you need to understand the requirement gaps. So that is the starting point, and then you need to understand the security requirements what we have derived clearly, right? And also you need to apply your risk-oriented thinking as a QA into the threat model and identify possible threats in your solution, and participate to the architecture review meetings and also question security related matters. So that is very important. So in the design phase, you can identify possible weakness loopholes in your architecture, and then understand the different security testing techniques and what are the possible things that I can do in terms of testing, and understand the applicability for your project. So you need to understand what security testings are applicable for project. So can that be only vulnerability assessment, or can that be a penetration testing where we are exploiting vulnerabilities? That you need to understand the applicability. And also you better follow the defined process at so on. You can fine tune it if you require. You can suggest always, right? And perform manual analysis through our open web application security project guides and checklists. And also you can do automated scanning and dynamic analysis where you are identifying vulnerabilities while your application is running. So in that way, and also finally, you can report and escalate as necessary. During the escalation, it's very important to recommend your fix of the identified vulnerability to your implementation team. So that is your responsibilities, right? So as a developer, uh, again, the requirement gaps are something that you should also do, and also the understanding of the requirements, and also supports to threat modeling. Uh, and also during the architecture design review, the basic security aspects also should cover. So that is our architects always does, but you need to review and see what is there anything, any basics things are not covered, right? And most importantly, your tech related coding standards are followed before the implementation. And also you do code reviews to identify the security loopholes. And from the UI aspect, you consider security aspects of the UI. So those are very important things that as a developer that you should do. So by doing, especially these, by following these technology related coding standards and doing code reviews, you are actually playing your part of securing this DLC as a developer. As a DevOps, very important as a DevOps, it's very critical that he knows this network security and server-side security when it comes to deployments, and also to the possibility to adopt to the DevSecOps, where DevOps are trying to secure in their process, right? And also the possible vulnerabilities on on-premise and cloud deployments, and security risk associated to containers and other tools. For an example, Docker, Kubernetes, and proper privilege access controls on servers, and automate the security process if possible, and also proper vulnerability management, and considering on segment networks where when you're segmenting the networks, the risk is low. So those are set of DevOps role for securing this DLC. So I think by following those areas in each role of you are helping and supporting to secure SDLC throughout your project. So that's the takeaway here. So now the last phase. I would like to uh, give some brief understanding of the sound way of information security, and also how we extending it to cybersecurity. So now this is a simple flow that we follow. So from start, we are doing the architecture deep dive and domain study, and with that, now we have this optional and mandatory parts where if required we can do threat modeling based on the project. so that if required, we can omit that. But security test plan is kind of a must that we can do. And then we are coming to static analysis and dynamic analysis. And after dynamic analysis, we can share the vulnerability assessment report, or else we can proceed with exploitation and do a penetration test report. And so this is a simple security testing approach that we follow at SOAN 24/7 here. Okay. So here, actually, we covered that from design phase to testing, from threat modeling to testing. So this is where we have set of checklists and guides and process, and also some authorization mechanism we have established to follow whenever required. Uh, then I'd like to give some examples of our engagements, what we have did past briefly. So on Cube, as you all know, it's Android application. We did Android testing with some certain tools. This is actually our first Android pen testing engagement. We got so much knowledge there. So the legacies are stored in Drive. So if anyone can request, we can share those things for you to refer. In Matrix, our RMM portal, we did web application testing using the popular tools like SAP. And when in Punch, where this is a very technical project, we don't have a front end, and we had this proxy service. We tested the DLLs, the securing the DLLs, and also we did the stride method. We did thread modeling via stride, so that is our first convenient thread modeling project in SOAN. So these are several engagements that we did. So if you like to know the tools and the process, the artifacts are there to refer. So then I would like to tell you about our InfoSec group at SOAN. So we have this InfoSec core team and mailing group. So core team is the one actually the people who are interested in the information security. We form this group to guide our SOAN 24/7 security tech track. And the mailing group, actually they're interested on what is happening. So we are continuously we are updating them what is happening, and if they are interesting, they can come to the core team as well. So that's how we operate actually nowadays. So current group activities, we conducting this security training session for our team members bi-weekly, and also we did automated security testing expansion for our couple of projects. We are Jenkins and TFS. The TFS is in progress actually. And also we are trying to applying this NIST cybersecurity framework work roles, where we had defined knowledge, skills, and activities for our group members, so that they can achieve their task in a more convenient manner. So that is also something that we do now. So that is a brief introduction, or brief a brief introduction on what happening at SOAN with to the information security. Okay, so thank you very much, guys. So thank you very much. So I think you understood. In order to summarize, so first we went through understanding the landscape of cybersecurity use. So you understood the difference between information security and cybersecurity, and some prerequisites related to networking, and also web application, and also the testing techniques, right? Then we moved to securing the SDLC, and identified, understood roles of business analyst, quality assurance engineer, development, software engineer, and also the DevOps. So then we went through some update on what's happening on information security at SOAN. So this is actually this is from the presentation.